So, how does real, lasting social change actually happen? I mean, really happen? It's a question that's at the heart of so many movements throughout history. Today, we're going to dive into the answer laid out by the incredible Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, and we'll be pulling from one of the most important books of the 20th century. Our main source is Freire's landmark book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Since it first came out, this thing has sold millions of copies. It's become essential reading for teachers, activists, really anyone fighting for a more just world. And the whole argument kicks off with a really surprising, kind of startling idea. Freire starts with this haunting observation. Think about it. So many movements that start with this beautiful goal of liberation, they tragically end up creating new systems of control. They just swap out one set of rulers for another. So why does this keep happening? Well, Freire says it's because they end up using the oppressor's own playbook. To get what he means, he first breaks down exactly how oppressive systems hold on to power. He calls it the theory of anti-dialogical action. The key word to hang on to here is anti-dialogue. It's a one-way street. It's all about power flowing down, designed to silence people and keep them under control. So how does this actually work? Freire points to 4 key tactics in the oppressor's toolkit. First, there's conquest, and we're not just talking physically, but psychologically. Then you've got divide and rule, to make sure people can't team up against you. This gets propped up by manipulation, using myths and propaganda to keep people quiet. And finally, the most powerful and sneaky of them all, cultural invasion. What exactly is cultural invasion? Well, it's when a dominant group forces its values, its way of seeing the world, and its version of reality onto another group. It's a way of convincing people that their own culture is somehow inferior. It just crushes creativity and makes people feel like objects in someone else's story instead of the authors of their own. Okay, but Freire doesn't just diagnose the illness. He gives us the cure. He calls it the theory of dialogical action, and this is his blueprint for true freedom, one that's built not on domination, but on real communication and becoming more human. And this really gets to the heart of his whole solution. Dialogue. But listen, for Freire, dialogue isn't just talking. It's not just a chat. It's a creative act. It's the process where people come together as equals to actually understand their world, to name it for themselves, and by doing that, they begin to change it. But for this kind of dialogue to be truly liberating, Freire is clear that it has to be built on something much deeper than just words. It needs a profound love for the world and for people. It needs humility, the ability to learn from anyone. It requires faith in people's power to create, a real hope for a better world, and critical thinking to see things as they really are. This quote right here gets to the absolute core of his philosophy. What Freire is saying is that any real attempt to make the world more just has to be rooted in an act of love, a deep, courageous belief in the humanity and liberation of other people. So here you can see the 2 paths, clear as day, right next to each other. On one side, you have the tools of oppression, and on the other, they're direct, liberating opposites. So instead of conquest, you have cooperation. Instead of dividing people, you bring them together for unity. Manipulation gets replaced by genuine organization, and cultural invasion is overcome by cultural synthesis, where different cultures meet and create something totally new without one dominating the other. Now, this whole new way of doing things obviously demands a completely different kind of leader. Freire makes it crystal clear. A revolutionary leader can't just act like the old bosses. It doesn't work that way. The traditional model, the oppressor's model, thinks about the people. It sees them as passive objects, almost like chess pieces on a board that need to be managed and controlled. This leader shouts orders from on high and just expects everyone to follow. The revolutionary model, on the other hand, thinks with the people. And this is a huge shift. Leaders and the people become partners. They become co-creators. They work together. They learn from each other. They build trust. And together, they figure out their own path to freedom. This means that liberation is never a gift that a leader just hands down to the people. It's not something one person can do for another. For Freire, it is always, always a mutual process. People in communion, in this deep, respectful partnership, liberate each other. So this brings us to the ultimate goal. The whole point of Freire's project. What does a truly human revolution even look like? Well, it's about making a fundamental shift away from a world of domination and toward a world of humanization. So for Freire, a true revolution isn't about just swapping out who gets to sit on the throne. It's about dismantling the throne completely. It's about breaking that vicious cycle and creating a new kind of society where power itself works differently, where it's shared, it's creative, and it's humanizing. And that new society is built on this idea of humanization. Freire believed this is our shared purpose in life, to become more fully human. And what does that mean? It means being free to create, to think for ourselves, to speak our own truth, and to be the subjects of our own history, not just objects in somebody else's. And it really all comes back to this simple but incredibly profound difference. Do you impose your ideas on people, even if you have the best intentions, or do you build understanding and action together through real, honest dialogue? One of those paths leads right back to domination. The other is the only one that leads to true liberation. So as we wrap this up, Freire leaves us with a really critical question to think about in our own lives, in our communities, in our work. When we try to make things better, are we accidentally falling into that old trap of speaking for other people, or are we doing the much harder, much more necessary, and ultimately freeing work of speaking with them?